Hello, my friends. It's Kathleen James. I'm here live. I think you can see me. It says I'm live, so welcome. Thank you for being here. Let me pop out the chat over here so I can see. So far, nobody's joined us, but that's okay because I have a bunch of questions that people have already asked, and I will get started answering them. Let me just double check that we've got everything set up correctly. Well, okay, we'll just go on ahead. So thank you all for being here. This is season 3, episode 5, the live show. So it's me talking and answering your questions that you've already sent in. And why does the chat keep going away? Okay, so I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to see things over there on the chat. So if you have a question, ask it. And but in the meantime, I'm going to get started. I've already been asked. So let's see. Let's start with Mara's question. She actually had a couple. She wants to know how to alternate skeins for her yummy Malabrigo Rios without tangling and twisting. Well, there's going to be a little bit of tangling, but you can untwist it. And so what I've done, I've started my second sleeve of premium cable, and I have already alternated the yarns. So I've gotten my second skein in there. So this works the same if you're alternating 2 skeins of the same colorway too. So what you want to do, you're seeing the back here, and I've been knitting with the white, au naturel, and I'm going to switch to scrimshaw here. So I'm just going to let this go and pick this one up and start with the second one, okay? And what you can do is you can tug just a little to make sure that they're sort of even. Don't pull hard. It's always better to have yarn be too loose than too tight. You can always tighten things up a little, snug things between stitches. But if you haven't used enough yarn in a stitch, there's no more yarn to give, okay? So, and of course, so when you get to the end of the next round, you want to drop, in my case, the scrimshaw and pick up the au naturel. I used to twist them around each other, and I don't recommend that anymore. So that is going to mean that you are going to need to make some changes your knitted item. And so sometimes you're going to want to just turn it around, and that will untwist your strands. You can also pick up your skeins. Sometimes, usually on the body, I will have one skein on my right. I'm a thrower, so I knit from the right, and I will have the working skein on the right, and I'll move the other one to the left and sort of out of the way. And then when I switch them back for the next round, then I'm sure that I'm not twisting the strands around each other. The other thing you can do if they get twisted, if you're just banging out your sleeve and you're not worrying and the twist gets all wrapped up in here, you can, of course, let your sleeve dangle and twisted itself up. Untwist the yarns that way, okay? And release that twist. So that's really, there's really nothing more I can recommend for that other than sort of being aware of what your skeins are doing and consider moving them around. If that's not going to work, if it's in your project bag and you just need to leave it there, the dangle method works quite nicely. Mara had another question. She's interested in waist shaping, and she wanted to know where to put it using basic cable, which doesn't have waist shaping, and will it make the cables look wavy? And that's such a great question. So Jane, lovely Jane, is wearing basic cable, and where I put waist shaping in premium cable is here in the side panels. And you can do it right in the center of the panel, or you can do it closer to the outside, have it be a little more princess shaping. I did it just here at the side. It was just easiest to do it that way. And so that's only affecting this panel of fabric. It should not affect, sorry Jane, the spacing of the cables on the front or the back for that matter. To do that, if you wanted to curve the cables at all, you'd need to do the decreases between the cables. right there, and that would affect it. But generally, in fact, let me pull out, sorry. Well, there's the premium cable sleeve. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. There is waist shaping here in premium cable, and you can see, can you see? Yes, how it goes in and out a little? I haven't blocked this yet, but it does not, the back is probably the easier place to see. It does not affect, look at how tidy and straight those premium cables are. So the, we'll let Jane put her arm down. So that's a great question, and it will not affect the cables. If you wanted it to, if you wanted to curve those cables in, you need to do decreases between the cable panels. So that's certainly something you could do, something to consider. Okay, and then let's see what's next. Catherine is in the UK. Oh, I wasn't sure what time would work for her. So thank you for being here. Those of you who are here, you figured out the time. It's we are -5 GMT. I think that's right. I'm just going to start checking these off. Okay. Kat asks, since the sleeve in basic cable does not have a cable, if I get gauge, should I worry about the gauge of the cable? And I think that is an excellent question. So in basic cable, the gauge, I give you both gauges, stockinette and cable. And I always recommend working a sleeve first because that's a great way to get to know your yarn, and you get a nice long stretch, so you get a really good sense of stitch gauge and row gauge without having to cast on so many stitches. If you and I are getting the same stockinette gauge, so if you're getting the gauge on sleeve that I'm getting, your cables should be the same size. Because that's just, yes, that's how it is. You can then check your cable gauge against my cable gauge when you start the body. But if you're getting gauge on the sleeve, you are making that stockinette fabric in the same size and proportion approximately that I am. So then all of your knitting in this sweater with the same needles and the same yarn should be the same. So I hope that is clear. A lot of patterns for cabled items are given with the cable gauge. And the reason that's done is because usually you'll go back, you start off, you have a concept, you knit a swatch, and then you knit the thing. And then you go back and you double check your measurements and you measure gauge off of your finished garment. So it's easier to give the cable gauge. And in a lot of those instances, the design does not have a stockinette section. So a lot of designers aren't going to go back and then with the yarn and needles also knit a stockinette gauge. They're just going to take the gauge off the pattern. And especially if you're publishing with a magazine, they only have the garment that you send them and your pattern to tech edit and check the garment. So that so unless you insist on also sending in a stockinette gauge, they don't have enough stockinette fabric to make a really good measurement and give that gauge. So that's the nice thing about this, is that the sleeve provides that gauge and is quicker to work, and it's just nice and tidy. So, okay, that's Kat's question. I thought that was a great one. Let's see, now my friend Natalie wants to know, what she says, she will need to add 1 to 2 inches to the body to get the right fit, and that's in terms of circumference. She's thinking she will split whatever stitch count she's adding in half and add each half to the stockinette panel on the side, and that's exactly what I'd recommend. Also, she really doesn't like tight sleeves. She is like potter, ceramics, and so she uses her arms a lot, lifting, carrying, etc. So she wanted to add the same number of stitches to her sleeves. Usually she knits a small sweater with medium arms. In this case, let's say I add 6 stitches to each stockinette panel on the side and 6 stitches to each sleeve. Would that just make my Kitchener stitch section 6 stitches together, and add those extra 6 stitches to the rest of the stitches being joined all together, and do a couple extra decrease rounds for the raglan section? Don't know if that question is very clear. It is clear, and I understand your question. And my recommendation would be to not add those stitches to the Kitchener section, because that's going to increase the amount of fabric front to back under your arm. And I just don't think that you're going to need that much more. You could maybe add 1 or 2 stitches to each Kitchener section, so that you're Kitchenering 1 or 2 more stitches together, but I wouldn't do any more than that. And I would just do, if you think about it, each round of the raglan decreases, you take away another 8 stitches. So, so maybe that would be the thing. You've got, wait, you're adding 24 stitches, right? So that's 3 more decrease rounds. Or you could add, let's say, 2 stitches for each underarm bit for Kitchener. So that's 4 spots, right? 1 on each sleeve and 2 on the body. So that's 2, so that's 8. And then you're just going to do 2 extra rounds. And I think that really would be the right way to do it. If you're worried that the yoke is going to be too deep by adding what is essentially 4 rounds, so you'd have 2 decrease rounds and 2 plain rounds, you could consider for a couple rounds doing some double decreases. You know, actually just, yeah, 1 or 2 rounds, you could do double the decreases in those spots. But I would probably just throw in, you know, a few extra rounds in the yoke and leave it at that. But you don't want to make the Kitchener, so the underarm stitches that you hold, we hold approximately 8% of the body circumference of stitches for each underarm spot. So if you're increasing your body circumference, you said by 12 stitches, right? We're doing 6 on each side. So 8% of 12 is like 1. I don't know. 1.2 is 10%. So yeah, we'll say like 1 stitch. Okay, so 1 stitch on each side. So you can do that. But that 1 stitch is not going to affect the fit one way or the other. Okay, so I hope that that answered Natalie's question. I'm worried that this is not, hold on, I'm gonna try switching. Let's see. I'm still looking at you. I hope you can see me. Making sure. What happens if I go to my channel? Because I'm worried that you guys are asking me questions on my channel page. And, okay. Well, because I'm not seeing any questions over here in my little group chat thing. Let's see. I sent something. Okay, I just said hello. Can anyone else see those? It's over on the side for me. Okay, I'm just going to plow ahead. If you have a question, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it right now, you can send me a quick email. I will check that every once in a while. How's that? At Kathleen James. Let's do it that way, okay? So I'm going to go forward with questions. Make sure nobody's tweeting me. And okay, so Barbie has some excellent questions. I even just wrote it down that way. Barbie has some excellent questions because she does. She wants to know, if I change the cuff, neck, and bottom of basic cable to ribbing instead of seed stitch, and it's actually garter stitch here, but you could do seed stitch, and I can talk about either of those in a moment, will it take more yarn? So Barbie's concerned she's got 5 precious skeins of Malabrigo in Bobby Blue. Great color. And so she wants to make sure to conserve yarn. So switching to ribbing, you will use slightly more yarn for collar, cuff, and hem. Not a massive amount. So, you know, like, I don't know, I want to say 10 or 20 yards. That's another, if you do a basic swatch before you do a sleeve swatch, you can always go back and frog your swatch if necessary to you know, help finish your sweater. So what I also wanted to suggest, and this is something that I have done when I'm designing a project, but I don't write a pattern this way because I think it's a little complicated. But if you are very concerned about the amount of yarn, okay, I guess if you want to knit a sleeve for your gauge swatch, do 1 sleeve. Knit your body. Actually, I'm going to say for that, if you're really worried, you may not want to knit a sleeve first, because I'm going to tell you how I would do it. I would knit the body up to here, and then I would provisionally cast on the sleeves, the top of the sleeve stitches. So here, I'm going to spin Jane around. We'd start here. To the split round, you can still set those stitches aside for the underarms. And then when you get here, provisionally cast on the top of arm number. Come over here to the other side of your held. Come to your next underarm, provisionally cast on your second sleeve, knit across the back, and then start up on your yoke, okay? And knit your yoke, finish off the top, gather your remaining yarn, split it in half. Sorry about the siren out there. Split that yarn in half, pick up your stitches, and for this, I definitely recommend following basic cable as is and doing stockinette sleeves. Because what you're going to do now is you're going to pick up from your provisional cast on and from your held underarm stitches, join for working in the round, and work your way down to the cuff, using up all of your yarn potentially. You won't have to Kitchener stitch, but you will have to do that provisional cast on thing for the sleeves, which will actually make finishing go a little further and will allow you to use up all of your yarn. Boom. There you are. And if you have yarn left over, you can do something fun with it. But if you are really concerned, I have had designs where I've been working on it and I've been worried that I would not have enough yarn. So that is a way to do it. The reason I say that you need to follow the pattern as is and do the stop with Jane sticking her butt in our faces, that you want to do stockinette is that stockinette looks the same either direction, but if you are, but it can be half a stitch off when you pick up from a provisional cast on and start heading the other direction. It will be half a stitch off, but you won't notice that in stockinette. So that is why I recommend doing the stockinette sleeves. Okay, so let me answer Barbie's first question. And again, Barbie's concerned about her yarn. She says, if a person gets gauge, does that guarantee that they would use the same amount of yarn the pattern calls for, or are there other factors? So there are other factors. No, nobody's gauges is ever exactly precisely. I mean, you know, we have fingerprints. We're all ever so slightly different. But if you are getting gauge, you should use the same amount of yarn as I specified in the pattern, especially if you are knitting size 40, because the amounts from size, okay. So let's see, if you are looking at, right, so I give you yardage and number of skeins. So Barbie, I think you're worried, so are you 28, 32, 36, up to 40, and I did have yarn left over from knitting the 40. So if you are knitting the 44-inch size, and that calls for 6 skeins, so you wouldn't have enough. But anything below that, you should be fine. As long as you get gauge, you should use the same amount of yarn. We're making the same size stitches, the same number of rows. If our measurements are accurate or close enough, whether they're accurate or not, whether they match each other, then you should be fine. So hopefully that will, I can't think of other factors unless humidity is a significant factor. Sometimes if it's really humid, your yarn weighs a little more because it absorbs some of the moisture in the air, but hopefully that's not, that won't be an issue. I try to make sure everything, that's another reason to make sure your blocked items are dry before you remove them from wherever they are blocking. Okay, Barbie. So I showed that a little before. To do is to make sure that you let go of the one strand and pick up the other And I used to twist it. I used to pick it up from underneath. Let's see if I can show you how I'm doing this. So I was working with this, and now I'm working with this. And I used to sort of make sure they twisted around each other. But I found that that tends to make a tighter spot here. And that's, again, back at the top of the hour, I said, don't pull too tightly when you are changing skeins. And that it's always better to be a little loose than a little tight, because you can always tighten something up and pull that slack out. There is no slack. There is no extra yarn to give you some more room. Okay, so I'm really trying to figure out, I would love to know. Okay, sorry guys. I just wanted missing the, what's going on here? Okay, so I would like to see the chat. All right. Well, all right, we will get back, because I'm not seeing any chat here. So if you are asking me questions, I'm really sorry, I can't see it and I can't figure out why. Let's see. I'm gonna try to say something here. And it's showing up there. So try chat. All right. Barbie, we managed yarn with alternating skeins. So what you just leave the one you're not working with alone until you come around to it again, let go of the working yarn, pick up the other yarn, and start with that. You can tug a little, just like a tug, I shouldn't say, you should just gently pull so that the stitches don't look slack. You want to make sure the stitches always look very similar, if that makes sense, to keep everything balanced and even. Oh, yeah, that's right. I knew there was another good question. And this is like a general knitting question, but I think it's a great one. What do you do when you come to a knot in the yarn while knitting? And it happens, right? Even the best manufacturers will say there's a certain number of knots per skein is allowable for quality control. So that's something you should know as a consumer, that all of your yarn will be knot free. However, if you have a skein and you have, like, I think more than 2 or 3 knots in one skein, that is a problem. And you should contact the place where you bought the yarn, your LYS, or you could go straight to the manufacturer. But sometimes your LYS is the best way and the manufacturer prefers that you go through them. So your mileage may vary on that. But Barbie says when she first started knitting a lot, someone said always cut the yarn when you come to a knot. Others say to cut it and make your own magic knot. So of course, let me remind you that you are the boss of your knitting. So if you want to do a magic knot, why not? I don't. I usually, if I find a knot, I do cut it out, because I was taught not that there shouldn't be any knots in your knitting. And I do find, in terms of wear, that knots really kind of interfere with the nice smooth knitted fabric that we're making. So I will cut out the knot, go darn it, and then get on with knitting. I usually overlap the 2 strands for a couple stitches. So leaving like a 6-inch tail, work until you have about 6 inches left on that yarn, and then you've got the cut. Leave that hanging. Pick up your other yarn, leave about 6 inches below, and then knit with the 2 strands for 1 or 2 stitches. That sort of anchors things together. And then afterwards, at the end, I'll go back and weave in those ends, usually away from each other so as not to create too much bulk. I don't do magic knot because I don't know how to. So if somebody wants to teach me how, that would be cool. But I haven't really bothered. I don't mind darning in ends. I mean, I do, because I'd rather be knitting, but just a couple more ends isn't necessarily a problem. And that's one of the reasons I really, alternating skeins, you end up with like a couple more ends to weave in at the bottom, but your yarn goes much further. So, you know, you're not going halfway up, finishing a skein, and then starting another skein. You get to go up twice as far before you have any ends to weave in, and by then you're often really close to the split round, and you'd have ends to weave in there anyway. So I really do enjoy alternating skeins. Alternatively, I love working off of a cone of yarn. You do sometimes still find knots in there because the idea of winding 1,000 yards onto a cone and there being no breaks, that's a lot to expect of a yarn. So cones are great because you have fewer ends to weave into. You just keep going. A few other things. So the yarn I'm using for premium cable, this is Zalti and from Spirit Trail, and Jen puts her yarn up in these great fat skeins, like 600 yards, as does Jill Draper in her Empire skeins. That's like 1,200 yards in it's like a yarn baby. And who else was I thinking of? Oh, Miss Babs, the Yowza whale of a skein. Is that what it's called? Those big skeins are great for sweater knitting, so I highly recommend them. So that's what I just, break the knot, get rid of it so it's not, it tends to rub, can make a rough spot, and so I definitely say get rid of the knots. The only other reason I would consider using a knot to finish off something is if it were really a yarn that would not stabilize otherwise. So possibly a cotton or a silk, something that's just too slippery to work in any other way. A way to weave in ends and eliminate the knots. Okay, Karen would like me to clarify the split round. So that's where we are getting ready. We've reached the top here of our body to go onto the underarms, and we need to set aside those stitches, that 8% of our cast on number approximately, on each side, right? And we start over here in the middle of our left side is actually the beginning of the round. So it may seem a little confusing, the pattern I have you start there, keep going all the way around. Jane is gonna be dizzy by the end of this. Come all the way over here to the other side and go more than half of your whole body stitches. We're gonna go to the end of the underarm stitches. And then we put those underarm stitches, the right underarm stitches on waste yarn, and work across most, but not quite all of the back, right? And we're gonna stop at the underarm stitch. And then we're gonna put the second half of the underarms on waste yarn, and then the first half, which was from the beginning of our round there. So there is a little jog, it's one row. It will be completely invisible thanks to the Kitchener stitch for the underarm, or if you're gonna work your sleeves down, if you're conserving yarn, from that beginning of the sleeves. So let's see if I wrote it down, but I wanna make sure. Your round begins in the middle of the first underarm. So you will knit across those underarm stitches, then the front stitches, then all of the second underarm stitches. And the reason you wanna do that is so that you will have already worked the underarm stitches. And so your yarn, your working yarn will be in the right place to keep going. If you work up to the underarm stitches and put them on waste yarn, then you have to break the yarn to start again at the back and work across the back. I hope that makes sense. And so now you're gonna put those second underarm stitches on waste yarn, then you break the yarn. Then you knit the back stitches and stop here because, I mean, I suppose a completist could go and knit the rest of those underarm stitches for the left underarm and then break the yarn and then put those stitches on waste yarn with the end in the middle. But I like to be ready to go again. So I tell you not to break the yarn here and just set it aside. And then the yarn, this becomes the beginning of the round here. We are on the back, at the back left shoulder, and this is where we will begin knitting. When we start, when we join in our sleeves, we'll join in that first sleeve there, and then come around the front, do the second sleeve and the back, and then we're off to the races on our yoke. Right, I already said what I said. Said what I wrote down. Okay, so that was Karen's question, and Barbie's question, and I'm just gonna, okay. So I hope if you have questions that you will send me an email or tweet them to me, because for whatever reason, I am not. Okay, interesting that you see no chat. You can see each other's chat, but nothing of yours. Okay, and I can't see your chat. What the heck? All right. Sorry. Let's see. Chat. No, that just made my chat go away. Well, I hope you guys are chatting nicely with each other. I'm trying to figure out how I can. No. Oh dear. Okay. Well, that's not helping me. Because I can now. All right. You guys are just going to have to tweet me your questions. I am sorry. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what happened last. I haven't done this in a while, but okay. So I'll get back to the questions I have. So thank you, Mary Margaret and Kathleen. And in fact, Kathleen, I'm getting to your question right now. Hello, other Kathleen. Kathleen would love to hear more details on how to adjust the pattern so that she can add the cable to her sleeves. So that is a great question. The numbers for the sleeves are based on stockinette. So if you are planning to add cables, where did I put the sleeve? Like I added a single cable for premium cable, and that goes just, you know, on the front of the sleeve. The thing, of course, is that cables use more yarn. I mean, they tighten things up more. So you need more stitches to get the same circumference. So if you want to add cables, I would recommend, as we did with the body, do the same with the sleeves and increase right at the end of your cuff. Increase about 10%. So that would be knit 9, make 1, or knit front and back. Whatever makes you happy is fine. Your preferred method of increasing. But just bear in mind that, you know, knit front and back uses a stitch too. So don't knit 9, knit front and back, because that will give you a slightly different ratio. So then you'll have more stitches, and that will give you room to do the cables and cross those stitches over each other, and that tightens up the fabric. So if you're going to do cables over the whole sleeve, you may even want to add a few more stitches than the 10%, but I think 10% should probably give you enough. And I would also recommend not doing cable all the way around, because you're going to have your increases right on your sleeve. So that's hard to, it's hard to do cables in that. So I would do a single cable on the outside, or you could do 3 or 5 depending on your cast on, your numbers. But I think 3 would be great if you want it to really look mostly cabled. And then that 10% should be sufficient. But you will need to double check your numbers for your sleeve cast on, your sleeve increase number, and then working that out with the cable numbers. So that's something that I usually do for, you know, cabled sweaters. Like there's an errand for Frederick that has a bunch of cables on the sleeves. And so you will need to double check that the number of stitches you increase to will fit the right number of cables. And that's why it's also kind of easier to do a single cable. It adds that other cabled element, but it does not require quite as much complexity. Excuse me, I'm going to have a sip of water, and I'm glad I brought it in. Okay, so there's my water. And that, Kathleen, I hope that made sense in terms of how to make the adjustment for cables. And so I'm also kind of guessing that you haven't done the body, that you are starting with a sleeve, because otherwise I'd say another way to do it is to measure. It's getting a little close, huh? Our floors aren't quite level. To measure your body and see the cables, and then you can determine how much around the sleeve you want it to go. And you could just go off that. You could say, oh, that's, let's do it like that. So I could get around, I've got my hand in there at the start, and then I would just do the increases in the underarm, underside of the arm, and keep all that fabric in stockinette. You could consider adding cables as you have enough stitches to work them, if you want to do that. Okay, so Elaine is wondering about a bunch of things. She's wondering about raising the neck, or perhaps doing a turtleneck or hood. So let's do that first, because she's got a few other things. So raising the neck. This, we're going to take, Jane needed a scarf. She was feeling a little blah today. So we needed an extra punch of color. So the yoke here is the same front and back right now, right? If you wanted to raise the back of the neck, you wanted it to come up higher because you were really looking for like a winter cabled sweater, what I recommend doing is some essentially short rows. But basically, it's easier than you might think, because what we're going to do is just not work the front stitches. It's mainly this part of the front stitches. You're going to start, be sure to work, you're going to work front and back. You're going to work flat, essentially. Middle crossing happens on a right side row, and you do your wrong side rows, you purl and knit back, knitting the purls and purling the knits so that it's correct. But what you're going to do is you're going to work all the way up to doing the front body decrease in the raglan. And then you'll turn and work back until you get to the other one. And the great thing is those decreases, kind of like when you're doing short rows with work and turn with wrapping, the decrease secures the yarn there, which is nice and tidy. Then you don't have to worry about wrapping the stitch or anything. Just do the decrease and then turn and work back. And so the yarn is sort of secured at those decrease points. And so that's gonna get rid of more stitches. It's gonna bring it up higher here on the shoulders and higher on the back of the neck. And if you're working on a circular needle, these front stitches just stay there and don't get used. And you will eat up a few more body front stitches at each side. Then when you're ready to do the neck, if you're just gonna do the collar like this, or if you're gonna do a turtleneck, you will need to essentially rejoin to work in the round. And you'll come back and you'll start a right side, what will now become a round again. And you're gonna want to pick up and knit a few stitches depending on how many extra raising rows you did. Pick up a few stitches on this side, you work across your front, you'll pick up a few more stitches here, because you'll see there'll be this gap of fabric between the live stitches of the front and the live stitches of where you've been working your raglan decreases. And do the same on this side, and then just go to town. So that's how you'd raise the back of neck. You also can just go whole hog front and back, not bothering to lower the front of the neck, and then go into a turtleneck. And you have a few choices on the turtleneck. You could do it like a roll neck, which I like. I used that on an errand for Frederick. And then we just do the neck in stockinette stitch. So just knit around and around and around. Be sure when you have it sufficiently long and know that it's going to roll. Like that's what stockinette does. It tends to roll. When you're looking at stockinette top to bottom, it rolls out to expose the purl side. When you look at stockinette that's like a flat piece, it tends to curl in towards the purl side on the sides. So on the vertical edges, it will roll to the back. It will roll knit side, and on the horizontal edges, it will roll to the purl side. So know that you are going to lose some length if you're doing a turtleneck, because it will roll. But that's nice, and then it's not quite so tight. And make sure that you bind off very loosely in that case. You may want to look into something like Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off in that case. That's on knitty.com. There's great resources there for Jenny's Magic Cast On and Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off. Those are great. I also find if I just do a bind off where I knit 2 stitches and then I work those 2 together through the back loops, which is often like a lace bind off, that will give enough give without making it sloppy, which is another concern. But and then if you don't want to do a roll neck, you could of course just do ribbing to match. If you decided to change to ribbing like a 3x3, then just do 3x3 ribbing. Make sure you have the right number of stitches to balance that out so that it ends. If you start net 3, you end purl 3. Otherwise, you can always adjust those stitches in the first row around. You know, add a few or take a few away, as many as you need. But you don't want to add a lot, of course. Okay, so that was the turtleneck. Hood, I am gonna be doing a hood, hopefully, to see if I have enough yarn for my premium cable. I've done hoods on a couple of other designs, including Sailor's Valentine and the Patchwork Princess. And both of those that I did, that I designed, I did what I call a turned heel short row hood. And it looks like a giant heel on on socks. Because what you're gonna do when you're turning a heel, you are changing the direction of the fabric, right? You've been working, we're looking sort of upside down at a sock if we're doing it cuff down. So we're working along the leg, and then we want to turn it and work out the foot, right? Foot, foot up, and then over here. So this is, but this works for a hood too, right? Yes, I'm not showing it very well, but trust me, it works. And you get this nice diagonal line on each side. In fact, hold on, let's just grab. Let's just grab, this is Sailor's Valentine. So, okay, so here's the hood from the front. On the side, oh, we're not gonna, you can kind of see. You can see that diagonal line there. That is where we have done the short rows. And so you start out working all the stitches around the hood, and then you work fewer and fewer, you leave more on the side, and you get to keep whatever's in the center going, okay, until you get to the point where you want to turn, and then you turn the heel, and you're still working the cable all the way up to the end. And then, but you pick up, you know, you get back those stitches from doing the short rows. And then I did go all the way around the hood, working perpendicular to finish it off to match the edgings on the front of the sweater. So that is a lot of fun. You can follow the basic concept just by using a sock pattern. If you understand how to turn a heel, you can do that. You want to double check your numbers to make sure it's going to come far enough around, but not so far that it's like enormous. And you want to go work about halfway, half as high as you think it needs to be, because then it, trust me, I did a hood that was twice as high as it should have been for one design before I figured out what was wrong. The easier hood that you could do is, once you get up to your neck stitches, to start working back and forth and just go back and forth and make a big panel of fabric that's high enough for the hood. Basically just straight up, working back and forth, and Kitchener stitch those half the stitches to the other half. Or you could do a 3-needle bind off, or you could just cast them all off and then sew a seam there. I'm not a big fan of seams, as you may know, so I would recommend doing a Kitchener, because that would make a nice smooth hood. So those are a couple of easy, great ways to make a hood. I'm sure there are others. Sorry, there's a little fruit fly in here. Okay, so turtleneck, hood, sweatshirt pocket. Yes, it would be nice, wouldn't it? That's why I'm doing it on premium cable. So the way I did the, this hasn't been blocked yet, so it will settle down. But the way I did the pocket here is, when I got up to where I wanted the bottom to be, I doubled the number of stitches here. And then I put half a needle to work for the pocket, and left the other half be with the rest of the body on my main working needle. And then I worked back and forth on the pocket. I added some edging stitches. I switched these from the cable to some garter stitch so it wouldn't roll. Because as we now know, garter stitch would, stockinette stitch would roll in, and the cables would get lost anyway. When I got it as high as I wanted to be, I stopped and I broke the yarn and left that sort of flapping around. When I went back and did the body, I made the inside of the body just basic stockinette, which did affect the gauge a little. I wasn't thinking too hard about it. I don't mind it, and I kind of like that you'll be able to see those sort of stripy spots. And this, of course, will stretch out a little more, so they'll be a little closer. But if you're very finicky, you may want to decrease away about 10% of the stitches for the inside of your pocket. Up to the point where the body was as tall as the pocket, I worked those stitches, knit 2 together or purl 2 together, depending on where I was in the pattern, and rejoined them, and then I went and finished the rest of the body. So it's great. That is a slightly more complicated way to make a pocket, and I kind of like using a clever knitterly solution. Not everybody does. You could also just knit. Okay, I'm gonna ask. Okay, let me finish this thought and just check Twitter. You could just knit a square rectangle to the size you want the pocket to be, and then sew it on the top and bottom. You could do that. It's totally fine. It's not a problem. But it was more fun to figure out sort of like a purely knitting solution to the problem for me. Okay, so that's okay. So Kathleen asks, do I need to change the neckline for a cardigan? That is a great question, and that's kind of knitter's choice. You could certainly knit it as is. But you may find that with the cardigan, you would like to raise the back of the neck a little. Or you may decide that you would like it to be V-neck instead of, this is basically like a sort of a slightly wider crew neck, because I don't have us go quite as tight into the neck as you could. So it really depends on the kind of, if you wanted a V-neck, you could certainly look at things like my solstice cardi to see, we start doing some decreases after we join I guess it starts a little before we join. And so that sort of, we do decreases here. Those would eat away at your cables, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So that might be if you want to do a V-neck. If you want it to just be a crew neck, you know, sometimes I do a crew neck and then I just never button those top buttons. It sort of flaps open and I like the way that looks. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. So I just, okay. So I hope that answers your other question, Kathleen. And I think I explained a bit about cardiganizing things in the last episode, and I hope that that if you're planning on doing a cardigan, that I've given you enough information. If not, definitely you can ask right now here. You can ask after this episode in the notes, you know, comment section on YouTube. You can also, of course, come to the Ravelry forum, the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum. There are threads for each episode. So we can have a whole thread about cardiganizing things, or you can just put it in this one or the customization episode, which was episode 4. Okay. Elaine was also wondering about changing the cuffs to 2x2 ribbing for the 36-inch size. She's changing it from the garter stitch to a 2x2 ribbing. And let me see, I want to say that normally you'd be casting on, right, 34 stitches for the garter stitch cuffs. So, what did I say it was? 34? Right, and you're gonna be, so I think you could go with 40 for that. I think that would be fine. You could go up to 44. I would say that's not necessary, but if you really want to make sure like that there's a lot of stretch for the cuff, then I would do the 44, because that's only one more 2x2 rib, right? But you don't want to do the same numbers as you would for garter stitch, because then your ribbing would be really stretched out, unless that's a look you want where it's kind of taut. Usually with ribbing, you want it to have a little give, right? But if you cast on just the 36 stitches I called for in the garter stitch version of the cuff, it would end up kind of looking like this, and that's probably not what you want. So you could, I think 40 would be fine, but if you're really worried about it and you don't like ribbing, what ribbing looks like when it's stretched out, go with the 44. Again, I don't think that's going to add a significant amount use a significantly greater amount of yarn. Okay, so I think that's all of Elaine's questions. And then Donna had a great question. Donna has narrow shoulders. That is not a problem I have. I have like very big, square, nice, strong, straight shoulders. Nice, strong, whatever. I have big shoulders. and I cannot lie. But if you have smaller shoulders, you are going to be worried about how the sweater is going to fit up here. And I get that. So some options would include, I forgot to ask, I don't remember, Donna, if you still have good sized arms, and if you're basically, because one thing is you could consider doing the smaller size arms, and then making some adjustments in the yoke as to how many stitches you decrease, because you could do the decreases at the body rate, and then that would make your shoulders smaller, because you'd start off with slightly fewer stitches. You'd want to hold the same number of stitches for the underarms, for sleeve, on the sleeve and the body. And so then you would have fewer stitches in the sleeve. And then that would make a narrower shoulder to begin with, and that would make it, that might be your best bet. But if your arms are good sized and, you know, in proportion to your body, and it's just your shoulders that are smaller, you could, you know, one thing that might be really easy is to just go down a needle size or two. I tend not to like those solutions for sizing as a general rule, because that's just the way I am. But that might be the quickest and easiest, but I can't tell you exactly how much that's going to change things. The good thing is that the yoke is a smaller amount of knitting. So, and that's why I like bottom-up sweaters, is that I find a lot of times the fit issues for me are in the shoulders. And so if I have to frog the yoke and go back down to where the held stitches were for the underarms and reknit the yoke, that's not a ton of knitting. I don't mind that. I mind if I have to reknit the body, right? That's a lot of stitches. So, so you could experiment with that, but I also might experiment with doing more significant decreases. Earlier on, I talked about, I think it was with Natalie's question about, you know, the bigger sleeves and the smaller body. You could do, instead of, you know, decreases, a single decrease at 8 points, which is essentially what the raglan is. Experimenting with doing a double decrease, maybe just on the sleeves. And so you would get that tightening up of the sleeves more quickly than you're eliminating the body stitches. So instead of, you know, knit 2 together, knit 1 or 2, I forget now. I'm working on a lot of patterns right now, so I don't always have the exact details in my mind. But if you do your decrease and then you do your other decreases, instead you do knit 3 together on the sleeve, and then slip knit on the body, knit 2 together, and then you would want to do, instead of slip knit, you would do slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over. That's the 2 stitch decrease that matches knit 3 together, and that goes parallel with slip knit. And the great way to think about those, and I don't think I've talked about that in this season yet, is decreases are directional, right? And we are using directional decreases this time around. In Solstice Cardi, we used a double decrease, and we used the centered one, which is slip 2, knit 1, pass 2 slip stitches over. And one of the great things to remember is whichever stitch, this is on the right side of knitting, whichever stitch your needle goes through first is the stitch that's going to end up on top. So if you think about it, when you do, I have to hold it and do it. Sometimes I get confused otherwise. Okay, so if I am going to do a knit 2 together, oh, can we see that? My fingers are all in the way. So knit 2 together, your needle goes through the second stitch first, right? And it leans that way. Your second stitch ends up on top. And if you slip knit, the first stitch ends up on top, and so it leans the other way. And the same thing goes with double decreases. Knit 3 together, that third stitch will be on top of the other 2. Slip 1, knit 2 together, that slipped stitch will end up on top of the knit 2 together stitch. You can lift that up and over, and that becomes the stitch that's on top. And then my favorite double decrease, sometimes called the center double decrease, sometimes called the oh so poetic slip 2, knit 1, pass 2 slip stitches over. That center stitch, because your needle went through that first, that's the one that ends up on top. And that's just very helpful in remembering if you want to do a double decrease in place of single decrease, to continue to mirror the angle of the decrease so that everything looks really nice and smooth, but you got rid of an extra stitch. So I think that might really be the most elegant way to go. If you want to, if you have smaller shoulders, to get rid of more stitches on the sleeves than you do on the body. And that, and you may not need to do that every time. You're going to want to do a little bit of thinking about the measurements, or just keep trying it on as you go. And for that, that's another reason I like to work with a longer circular needle. You know, I've got like this is like a 40-inch circular needle, because then I can and then with it, I slip it off to waist yarn and stuff. So you could try it on and see, make sure that it's going up enough. And when you do feel like it's gone up enough, then you could go back to doing your standard double decrease. Okay. I think I answered John's question. We have a little, we have about 4 minutes left. I'm going to double check Twitter, and I'm, okay. Oh, good. I answered other Kathleen's, both of her questions. I don't see any other questions here. I'm wondering what happens if I go to YouTube here. It's probably going to echo me talking, but maybe I turn my sound down, because I'm just trying to figure out why I can't see your questions. No, I don't want to try YouTube. Let's see. Okay, it's not working. So if you have any other questions, tweet them to me. Yes. And I'm really sorry that I cannot, you guys can't see my chat and I can't see your chat. I got to figure out what the deal is with that. This is links. What happens if I go to the YouTube page? Will I see myself live? I got to figure out what the deal is with that. Okay. This is, all right, I muted myself. Oh. Now I can see your chat. Oh man, that was annoying. Okay, well, I'm so glad you guys are here. Lisa, thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. All right. There is a slight lag. I'm sorry about that. Okay, let's just see if there are any other questions. Imagine not color weaver's knot. I don't know about that. Oh. Kathleen, you also wanted to know about when yarn has multiple small areas where the plying is not twisted correctly. And Kat, you're right. Briar Rose has those nice big fat skeins. Okay. So Kathleen would like to know about if it's not twisted correctly. I gotta go back to this because I can't look at myself. And I have a little bit of a lag too. Okay, right, where the plying has not been as thorough as it's supposed to be, that's just the nature of yarn sometimes. Again, like those multiple knots, if you find too many sort of slubby spots, especially with something that's supposed to be really even, then that's again something you should contact either your local yarn shop where you got the yarn or the yarn company itself. But otherwise, I just kind of plow ahead. But if I feel like it's a really significant mess, I will cut it out. Because otherwise, invariably, no matter what I do, it will end up being like this spot right there. So that's why, you do want to also think about where it is. If it's in that panel on the side, that slubby bit of yarn, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. So let's see if I figured that out. Okay. More comments below. All right. So I think that is it. I can't believe it took me so long to figure out how to talk to you guys. I am running out of time. So I'm going to say a huge thank you for being here. Excuse me. I love talking to you guys. I love talking knitting. Thank you everyone who wrote in with questions. Remember, if you have more questions, you can always find me in all sorts of places. People found me on Twitter today because I could not figure out how to find the comments. The Ravelry forum is really such a perfect place for this kind of conversation to continue because everybody can see it and can add to it or can get the answers that they are looking for. So thank you so much for being here. Americans, I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. Next Friday's episode will be on cabling. There's my timer. All right, done. That's time. Sorry. I put my iPad timer on, and apparently with the new iOS, I couldn't figure it out. So next week, cables. I will show you how to cable without a cable needle. I will talk a little bit about what to do if your stitches are getting a little wonky at the edges of your cables, and whatever else you have. So if you have any questions about cabling, please let me know. You can hit reply on an email, comments. I see it all. I don't respond on weekends. I need a little break too. I thank you all for being here. Have a great Thanksgiving for those of you who celebrate. The rest of you just have a lovely week. If you are new, if you just found me through the Stronger Together and Knitters Pay It Forward, thank you so much. I kind of want to cry and hug everybody, and what an amazing week it has been. It was a really hard week last week politically for me and for a lot of people, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so being part of the Knitters Pay It Forward and the Stronger Together movement on Instagram and Facebook and mostly on Ravelry, I have 5,363 new friends as a result. So enjoy those patterns, knit well, and then go put some more good in the world. So thank you all for being here. Love you. Have a great week. I'll see you next Friday. Well, you'll see me. I won't see you. Thanks, guys. Take care.